Right, so the Labour government of Sir Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves are once more living up to those nicknames by unveiling a series of proposed benefit cuts that make what the Tories did seem like a walk in the park, disproportionately targeting disabled people specifically most of all, sparking outrage amongst activists, disability rights advocates and the wider public. At the same time they are doing that, though, reports have also come out that Chancellor of the Exchequer Rachel Reeves was lobbied by the global investment giant Blackrock to water down plans to abolish the non-dom tax status, a move that would have ensured the ultra-wealthy paid their fair share of taxes and would of course have meant that the disabled arguably would not need to face such stringent cuts as they are, the rich paying a bit more. But of course, as we should all know by now, Labour won't have a bar of that under the current leadership, red Tories as they absolutely are. The hypocrisy of what Labour is now doing to the disabled, therefore, is as hypocritical as it is unconscionably cruel. Labour, once the party of the working class, has become a party for the wealthy and nobody else, a fact that should now be obvious to more and more people. A party that is willing to sacrifice the most vulnerable in society whilst protecting the interests of the elite. There can be no more depraved an act than that for a government to enact amongst its own people. Labour is proposing horrendous, potentially lethal benefit cuts that targeting disabled people deliberately. Yet at the same time, under the influence of wealthy lobbyists, they abandon an election pledge at the behest of those wealthy, at the behest of their lobbyists, with all the devastating consequences these policies will have on millions of lives.
We've got, I think, a broken welfare system. It's not working for anyone. It's not working for the people who depend on it, and it's not working for taxpayers. The only way that you get the welfare bill on a more sustainable footing is by getting more people into work.
Has your department carried out an impact assessment of how many people will be affected by these cuts?
I'm not talking about that because my objective is to...
Is that a yes or a no?
My objective is to get people into work, into good work.
Right, so that was a brief clip there of Liz Kendall, the terrifying boss of the Department for Work and Pensions, defending massive £6 billion proposed cuts to the people her department oversee, those in low pay, the long-term sick and disabled, justifying the attacks on the disabled there whilst doing a dire job of trying to avoid the subject of an impact assessment being done in relation to these cuts, clearly something she hasn't done. All the more reinforcing how little this government actually cares for the issues affecting the long-term sick and disabled, any more than the previous Tory administration did, and how damning an effect their policies are going to have on them. A vile incompetent who will have blood on her hands should these cuts be pushed ahead with. There will be no forgiveness for any MP who votes these through. There must be a reckoning down the road for what is an evil and unnecessary cut being made in preference to taxing the rich. The focus of Labour's proposed social security attacks is not entertain the notion these are reforms, that implies improvement, and these are not that, is a series of cuts to disability benefits, particularly personal independence payment, or PIP, and universal credit, or the disability elements of that. PIP is a vital benefit designed to help disabled people cover the additional costs they face in their day-to-day lives, such as mobility aids or home adaptations and transportation. Nobody has to be disabled. Nobody ever does. But quite obviously, there are additional costs associated with having a disability. It is not a handout. It is a lifeline, therefore, that enables disabled people to live with some semblance of dignity and independence. Clues in the middle word, after all, of PIP. And in many cases, access employment. It is also already spitefully difficult to claim it. The hoops you have to jump through are crazy, and as such it shouldn't be surprising that various organisations offer services to help people navigate through that. As a result, Labour now want to make it even harder to claim it, just as the Tories did, ignoring the purpose of the benefit, just as the Tories did, all in the name of more austerity, and you've guessed it, just as the Tories did. Labour has singled out PIP for cuts, and as such has singled out the disabled specifically. There's no other way of reading into it. As if it is somehow their fault for being disabled. Any of us could suffer a life-changing injury tomorrow. So this could be us one day, framing it all as part of a broader effort to reduce welfare spending in the name of what the country needs by £6 billion, without addressing any of the reasons behind that bill, which I will come on to presently. The government's rhetoric around these cuts has been vile. Chancellor Rachel Reeves and Liz Kendall have repeatedly claimed that a life on benefits is a lifestyle choice. But when these cuts are falling disproportionately on the disabled, as we now know they are planned to be, This is a narrative that is not only false, but downright harmful and deeply offensive. Disability rights advocates have condemned this characterisation, as you might imagine they would, pointing out that many disabled people rely on benefits out of necessity, not choice, because of the additional costs of managing their daily needs, which might include being able to go to work. The idea that anyone would choose to live in what is already poverty, though, the UN have just told Labour, has very recently just told them to ditch the two-child benefit cap and raise the rate of universal credit in order to literally combat poverty in this country. Never mind what they claim is a lifestyle choice, whilst facing daily struggles with mobility, health and accessibility, all on top of that. It's just a grotesque distortion of reality that can only come from truly warped and depraved individuals, but you pretty much have to serve in Starmer's government. The proposed cuts to PIP and disability-related elements of universal credit will have devastating consequences for disabled people, but these cuts are part of a broader pattern of hostility towards disabled people that we have seen under this Labour government. Activists have accused the government previously of scapegoating disabled people for economic challenges rather than addressing the root causes of inequality and poverty. The targeting of PIP in particular has been described as a deliberate and cruel move designed to save money at the expense of those who can least afford it, those with additional needs at that, and those least able to access or engage with work, even if their health and or their conditions allows for that. Because for many it clearly won't, yet they still face those cuts to incomes. And this is, of course, all par for the course for Rachel from Accounts, as we should know by now. As Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary under the previous Labour leadership of Ed Miliband, she was known for her hardline stance on benefits, wasn't she? Having stated that Labour would be tougher than the Tories on welfare. Well, this rhetoric is now literally being translated into government policy, with Reeves leading the charge to cut disability benefits while refusing to rule out further reductions going forwards into the future. Reeves's apparent disdain for benefit claimants, however, has also exposed her gut-churning levels of depraved hypocrisy with regards to those with next to nothing, struggling to get by just in their ordinary day-to-day lives, and now being forced, it seems, to struggle even more, versus the super rich, who she clearly has a great deal more fondness for. You see, it's been reported by Open Democracy that with regards to the now abandoned election pledge to clamp down on tax avoidance and abolish the non-dom tax status, Reeves was lobbied not so long ago by Blackrock to soften her stance on the abolition of the non-dom tax status, an excerpt of their coverage reading, Rachel Reeves changed the government's position on non-doms weeks after one of the world's most powerful financiers asked her personally not to increase the tax burden on the super rich. Documents released to Open Democracy under the Freedom of Information Act reveal Stephen Schwartzman, the CEO of leading asset manager Blackstone, raised concerns with Reeves about her plans to reform the tax treatment of non-domiciled individuals at a meeting in Downing Street in December. The Chancellor had previously used the autumn budget in late October to recommit to Labour's manifesto promise to abolish the non-dom tax regime, which allows wealthy individuals who live in the UK to be domiciled elsewhere for tax purposes. But around a month after meeting with Schwartzman, Reeves watered down this commitment. So we have an immoral Chancellor, therefore, who has prioritised the interests of the ultra-wealthy over those of disabled people, and a paper trail demonstrates it seems, and serves as a damning indictment of Labour's values, or the complete lack thereof. The non-dom status is a controversial enough tax loophole in itself. We all know about it. We all absolutely hate it. It's disgusting. It enables the ultra-wealthy to avoid paying taxes in the same way the rest of us do. So abolishing this loophole would generate significant revenue if they're made to pay their taxes properly. Would be very popular with ordinary working class people because we all do pay our taxes properly, don't we? But instead, it shows whose side Labour's really on here. It is a pot of cash which could be used to fund essential services like the NHS or social care, and instead Reeves has chosen to protect the interests of those wealthy enough to be able to abuse the tax system, and chooses instead to target disabled people for cuts to find that money elsewhere. Coming back to the point about why the welfare bill is going up, however, one elephant in that particular room that has to be addressed is Labour's approach to, and the simultaneous cuts being levied on the NHS. Under consideration here are a proposed £7 billion in cuts to address a growing spending deficit. However, these cuts will inevitably end up leading to longer waiting times, another broken election pledge, reduced access to care, worsening health outcomes for millions of people. For disabled people who already face significant barriers to accessing healthcare, these cuts will be particularly devastating. And it is particularly worth noting that many people on disability and long-term sickness benefits are in that position precisely because of delays and inadequacies in NHS services. Chronic underfunding of the NHS has left many people without the support they need to manage their conditions and be able to return to work. But rather than addressing these systemic issues, which clearly have led to the welfare bill going up, Labour has chosen to punish disabled people for the failures they are now presiding over the healthcare system over here as well. Nice, aren't they? Labour's proposed benefit cuts have been met, as you would imagine, with widespread condemnation from activists, disability rights advocates and so many more. Organisations such as Disabled People Against Cuts, DPAC, and the Disability Rights UK have accused the government of perpetuating the same punitive policies as the Conservatives, which they are, but with even greater severity. Labour, the party that's supposed to be more on the side of the working class, is now even worse than the Tories. As reported by ITV News, critics have argued that the cuts will push disabled people further into poverty and isolation, undermining their ability to participate in society. The government's claims that a life on benefits is a lifestyle choice has been particularly galling to a great many people, disabled people and advocates who point out that disabled people are already amongst the most marginalised and disadvantaged groups in society. The idea that they are somehow responsible for their own plight is obscene. The Labour government's proposed benefit cuts and their willingness to cater to wealthy lobbyists means the party is absolutely no better than the Conservatives. In fact, some argue that Labour could be even more lethal to the long-term sick and disabled than the Tories were. The Conservatives' austerity policies caused immense harm to disabled people, but Labour's cuts are being implemented with a veneer of progressive rhetoric, making them all the more insidious. The fact that Labour is proposing these cuts just 8 months into its tenure is a bit of a stark reminder of how far the party has strayed from its roots and how quickly and how much longer in government they've still got to go and how much worse they could potentially still get. Once a party of the working class, Labour has become a party of the wealthy. Just another Tory party. Just another Reform UK, if you like, willing to sacrifice the most vulnerable in society to protect the interests of the elite. Labour's proposed benefit cuts represent a profound betrayal of the party's values and the people it claims to represent. By targeting disabled people for cuts whilst catering to the demands of wealthy lobbyists, the Labour government has revealed its true priorities, protecting the interests of the rich and the donor class, shall we call them, at the expense of the most vulnerable and the least well off. If it walks like a Tory and it talks like a Tory, it is a bloody Tory. Reeves might not like being called a Tory, but that's only because the truth hurts. These policies will have devastating consequences for millions of people, pushing them further into poverty and isolation, and we as a society should not be standing for that. As I said before, this could be any of us tomorrow, and this is how little you're valued by this rancid Labour in name-only shambles, should it happen to you. Of course, another set of lies that undermines all of these claims in needing to tighten our belts is the fact Starmer and Reeves are still bleating about that £22 billion fiscal black hole which needs filling, apparently. Another reason to justify these cuts to disability benefits, of course. But then there's the small matter of having given Ukraine £8.3 billion as well. Who knew the disabled were paying for most of that, eh? Does that seem fair? Is that the right resource to tap? That's certainly the optics now, isn't it? I don't think it's fair at all, but the hypocrisy of pleading poverty whilst always finding money for war doesn't wash either. Get all the details of Labour being caught out for lying again in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe as well if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new content published daily, as well as helping to support the channel, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for working class people, and I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers folks.